Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In the previous video, I took a look at how Hawkeye did with his new upgrade and uniform in both PvE and PvP, and obviously the next character that I'm looking at now is Kate Bishop. Since the two characters are very similar to one another, I also have some comparisons with the results that I got from Hawkeye yesterday. As a quick heads up though, Kate does seem to be a little bit behind Hawkeye in terms of her PvE performance, but her PvP performance is surprisingly consistent, even if you don't have her artifact. That said, I was lucky enough to pull a level 5 artifact from the Essence chest for her, so I will show you how she does with and without the artifact. So similar to my other character tests, I first took her into a stage 60 of Thanos without her awakening upgrade, and the current tests that I'm running have no damage proc on her. I simply have an invincible obelisk. If you want to build her specifically for PvE, which she is pretty good at, similar to Hawkeye, you can go with a CTP of energy because she is pretty proc friendly, regardless of the fact that she doesn't have guard break immunity on her uniform like Hawkeye does. Because she has guaranteed crit rate in her kit, you can also go with a CTP of Rage. In terms of which one is the better option for a pure PvE build, from the previous tests that I've done with other characters and from the results that I've seen from other players in the past, a CTP of Energy, because it can be reforged, is usually a better option in things like World Boss Ultimate and World Boss Legend, whereas a CTP of Rage is usually a better option in point or score based modes like ABX and Squad Battle. In fact, I think this character is in the running for the Speed Hero Female Day for ABX, so that's something to keep in mind if you're going to build her. You can go with a CTP of Rage, and she'll perform pretty well in that mode. One of the great things about the character is that she is pretty straightforward and easy to play. A lot of her skills can be cancelled almost instantly, and they have lingering AoE damage on them. Besides that, the fourth and the second skill have paralysis that ignores immunity, which means with the cooldown, you can essentially perma-lock down the opponent. You can see that in the previous world boss, I finished with 2 minutes remaining, which is actually pretty good with no damage proc and no awakening, and versus Proxima, I finished with 3 minutes remaining because she can apply that all defense down that ignores immunity, which obviously could not be applied in the Thanos stage. When you are able to awaken her and transcend her, the stat bump that she gets is very similar to Hawkeye's. It isn't something that's crazy amazing or OP even, but it is a very solid upgrade. As you can see with my build, I was able to go up about 12,000 physical damage and around 26,000 HP. In fact, she does get a little bit more HP increase than Hawkeye, and interestingly enough, she does seem to be a little bit tankier than him because she has that 25% damage mitigation in her kit that Hawkeye doesn't have, and because her heal activates almost instantly when she casts her 5th skill, unlike Hawkeye who has a long delay after he uses his 3rd skill. If you're curious to know what the rotation that I went with was, I started with the 3rd skill, which I instantly cancelled into the 5th skill, which you insta-cancel into the 4th skill. If you have a single skill damage proc CTP, like an energy, this is the skill that you want to proc on, and keep in mind that you do not want to cancel this skill early because there is a second portion of animation and damage to it after she jumps back and shoots out this little arrow that spins out what could be bullets or something to damage the opponent. Obviously, if you're not using an energy and have something like a rage, you can cancel right after you see that final part of the animation for the 4th skill and go into your 2nd skill till your other skills are back off cooldown. The reason for going with this rotation is the 3rd skill has damage accumulation for the damage that you deal, so you want to open with that. The 5th skill can be cancelled, so you want to layer that on top of the rotation, and the 4th skill has that second portion of damage on it that I talked about, so you want to finish off with that skill. You can see that with the awakening, my clear time improved by 50 seconds or close to a minute. Because I was able to finish so quickly even without the damage proc, similar to how I did with Hawkeye, I decided to take her into stage 99 of Thanos to see how she would hold up there. Since I obviously have access to the Awakening in this fight, the rotation when you have the Awakening skill unlocked would be 3, cancel 6, cancel 5, cancel 4. The 6th skill can be instant cancelled and actually has a damage proc on it for the next skill that does damage, so if you use these skills relatively quickly, you can transfer that proc onto the 4th skill after you go 6, cancel 5, cancel 4. The timing is actually not that sensitive on it, so you should be able to carry that proc over most of the time. I mentioned this in my Hawkeye video, but any character that can finish somewhere around 2 minutes left on a stage 99 of Thanos with no damage proc, at least for my account, shows that the character is really strong for PvE content. Unsurprisingly enough, in the Proxima fight, I had a clear time improvement of about 1 minute and finished the fight in 1 minute. As always, a PvE test isn't complete without taking the character into a World Boss Legend, so you can see the raw damage in their kit. Again, similar to Hawkeye, she finishes with close to 2 minutes left on a stage 9, using only a damaged leadership that isn't really the most optimal, and having no support. However, I noticed that when I tried to push to higher stages with her, so by adding another support to allow for that to happen, she did struggle a little bit more than I expected her to. I believe one reason for that is because a lot of her damage is kind of AoE focused on the spot that she casts, and her AoE isn't really as massive as Hawkeye's was, so if the opponent moves away from that AoE damage, it seems to kind of be for nothing. That could be one factor, and another is that she just isn't as strong as Hawkeye, even though she is still really good. You can see that I wasn't able to complete this stage, but if I did practice it a little bit more and try to cast these skills when I know it would hit the opponent, I'm pretty sure that I would still be able to clear it. Regardless, you can see that for the same stage with Hawkeye, I was able to complete it with over a minute left. Similarly, when I went to stage 24 of Mephisto, I was only able to get to the last 10 health bars before time ran out. But for Hawkeye on the same stage with the same conditions, I was able to complete it with 30 seconds left. Even though the character does lag behind Hawkeye in point-based modes like ABX, she is surprisingly very close to him. In fact, I almost scored an identical amount of about 8.2 million with both characters. The fact that there is a specific day allotted for speed hero female characters means that you wouldn't really miss out in building the character for PvE if that's what you wanted to do, even though Hawkeye does perform better than her. If you wanted to build her for PvP, however, she is surprisingly better than you might think. You probably won't be using her in Timeline, however, because those characters are usually ones that have a revive, an immortal passive, or have a very stacked kit. Despite that though, she is pretty consistent even without the artifact, and even more so with it. On auto, the AI prioritizes the 4th skill, which is great for her because she leaves a big AoE damage skill on the field, which also incapacitates the opponent, removes their defenses and lowers their attack, as well as providing invulnerability for her. Not to mention an additional damage buff too, and some partial iframes. From there, the next skill that the AI uses is usually the 5th skill, which is also great for her because the 5th skill has 3 seconds of invincible, which again helps with her survival, not to mention that it also contains a 20% heal, which applies instantly when the skill is activated. From there, the AI usually goes back into the 4th skill because it's off cooldown, but if the character gets interrupted, sometimes you can go into the 3rd or 2nd skill. It's a little bit unfortunate that the 3rd skill isn't used a little bit more often since it does have that damage accumulation on it, but her damage on the 4th and 5th skill as is are actually really high. You can already see that even without the artifact equipped, I'm able to consistently take down both of Doom's lives as well as other top metas like Centuring Warlock. Note that I wasn't able to beat Thanos in these fights because she does struggle a little bit against him when he goes into his iframes and is able to heal up, but you can notice the difference that the artifact makes when she gets that iframe ignore available to her. Also, similar to Hawkeye, because she has lingering AoE damage, she does have some issues versus reflect characters like Colossus. Because she doesn't have guard break immunity built into her kit like Hawkeye does, the options that you have for a PvP centered build are a little bit less flexible than him. If you're curious to know the build that I was using for this testing, it's a mighty CTP of Authority with that steal effect. The reason that I went with this is because she already has damage mitigation in her kit, so it pairs well with that steal effect mitigation, climbing up to a higher value. In addition to this, because her 4th and 5th skill aren't full iframes, if and when she gets down to that 50% health mark, she can gain damage from the damage accumulation portion of the Authority. Alternatively, if you have a good amount of health on your cards, say over 60%, you can also go with the CTP of Regen, because she does have higher base health than Hawkeye, around the 32,000 mark I believe. That, coupled with the fact that she constantly uses her 5th skill, means that you can heal a greater amount, and it could potentially work pretty well. As I mentioned before, you don't really need a proc for the character because her base damage is so good, and gets even better if she possibly uses her 3rd skill, but if you do want to use a damage proc, a CTP of Greed could actually work pretty well. She is already pretty durable, and if you are able to reforge and get that ambush effect, she should be able to proc it to lower the opponent's mitigation and do even more damage that way. Note that that last fight and all of these other ones are now with the artifact equipped, so you can see the difference that it makes when you get that iframe ignore on the character. You won't really notice as big a difference versus Doom in my clips, since I was able to take down both of his lives surprisingly enough, but versus Thanos you can see right away the artifact activates up top, meaning I can go through his iframes and deal all of the damage before he heals, or even after he does, and take him out. Unfortunately, she still dies to Lord Colossus and his crazy reflux. You can see just how much of a difference the artifact makes for her PvP potential, since here the artifact does activate when Doom is in his iframe, and I'm able to hit him and take him out before that steal effect finishes filling up, and he becomes very tough to take out. You would think that Doom's 5th skill would be enough to take down Kate, but because she has 35% guaranteed dodge in her kit, if you're able to build up that dodge to max value of 75%, and coupled with a defensive based build like an Authority or Regen, you should be able to survive most burst damage skills pretty well. As you can see versus Thanos, I was able to activate the artifact right away, meaning that when he went into his iframes I was still able to cast my skills and burst him down before he finished off with his 4th skill. Note that without the artifact I wasn't able to take down Thanos at all in those previous 2 tests. The other nice thing about the artifact is that you also get a little bit of that ambush effect that you otherwise would have gotten from the CTP of Greed. And as you might know from either using Spider-Man or that CTP of Greed with an ambush effect, that damage mitigation reduction actually makes a pretty big difference, since it can even allow you to take down opponents who have a type affinity advantage versus you, such as combat types. Now Kate obviously won't be as good in PvP without that artifact, but even with it, versus characters that iframe a lot, she can struggle a little bit against, such as Spider-Man. Fortunately for her, she does have a lot of lingering area skills, which means that if Spider-Man doesn't take her out and comes out of his 4th skill iframe that he constantly spams, that AoE damage is going to end up hitting him, and the artifact will more than likely end up proccing at some point to take him down. This is another reason why I would recommend a defensive base build first, because if you face opponents like Spider-Man or even Doom, who iframe right away, you won't really be able to survive their initial burst damage. Besides that, some characters do have pretty quick skills, but fortunately for Kate, her 4th and 5th do have pretty good priority, and even if they get cancelled, the damage will still follow through. So as you can see, Kate is actually pretty consistent in PvP, despite the fact that her kit doesn't really have a PvP oriented focus. However, if you're trying to decide between Hawkeye and Kate, which uniform and character to upgrade first, I would probably advise you to go with Hawkeye before Kate, because you need her artifact in order for her to really excel in PvP. Besides that, Hawkeye does seem to perform better in PvE, and keep in mind that I didn't even have his artifact when I did this comparison, so he was ahead of Kate even without the artifact, and with it he should be even further ahead because he can get 35% extra damage with that maxed out 6-star artifact. That said, I don't think you can really go wrong building up either character because both are actually really good. But that pretty much wraps up this video. I actually do have some AC testing that I did with Hawkeye and Kate, and they've been actually performing really well, but I'll save that for one of my AC centered videos or AC tier lists. The next video that I will be doing will be for Maya or Echo's new uniform, so make sure to stay tuned to check that out. As always, thank you for your time and watching. Please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you did enjoy the video, but the video is now over.